The howling wind carried ice crystals that stung like needles against exposed skin. Laura pulled her tattered cloak tighter around herself and her infant daughter, who whimpered softly against her chest. The valley had never seen a winter so harsh, and the elders of her settlement had been whispering for weeks that this was no ordinary storm. They called it the Judgment Wind, a mythical tempest said to cleanse the land of impurities. Elra knew what they meant by impurities. They meant her child, Little Snowdrop, as Laura had named her in the secret language of her ancestors, had been born with translucent skin that seemed to catch and refract light in unusual patterns. The village elders had declared her storm-marked, a bad omen born to bring calamity. Since the birth, the villagers had been avoiding Elray's small hut at the settlement's edge. They would cross to the other side of the path when they saw her approaching, and mothers would pull their children close, as if Snowdrop's difference might be contagious. "Hush, little one," Elra whispered, her six-fingered hand gently stroking the baby's downy head. "They are wrong about you. You are light, not darkness." The wind intensified, howling through the cracks in the valley's stone formations. Laura had never seen the sky turn such a sickly shade of green. The air pressure dropped suddenly, making her ears pop painfully. She needed to find shelter before the full force of the storm hit. Her own hut would never withstand what was coming. She could see neighbors rushing toward the communal storm shelter, a reinforced cavern carved into the mountainside centuries ago by their ancestors. That was where she needed to go. Elra wrapped Snowdrop in 3 layers of thermal fabric, securing her to her chest with a traditional carrying sling. The baby's unusual eyes, so much like the night sky with pinpoints of light, gazed up at her mother with trust. Elra felt a painful squeeze in her heart. Whatever happened, she would protect this child. The journey to the shelter was only half a mile, but with the wind pushing against her every step, it might as well have been 10. Elra leaned forward at a sharp angle, using her body as a shield for Snowdrop. Ice particles stung her face, and she could feel her outer layer of skin beginning to crack from the extreme cold. Her species was built for resilience, but even they had limits. By the time she reached the heavy metal door of the shelter, her lungs burned from the frigid air. The storm had fully descended now, turning day into an eerie twilight. She pounded on the door with her free hand, the other holding Snowdrop protectively. After what seemed like an eternity, a small viewport slid open. A pair of yellow eyes, belonging to Grex, the security elder, peered out suspiciously. "Please," Elra shouted over the howling wind. "I need shelter for my child." The eyes narrowed. "The shelter's reached capacity," Grex said flatly. "Regulations state priority goes to productive members of the settlement." "She will die out here," Laura cried, holding up Snowdrop, who had begun to wail, sensing her mother's distress. "That creature should never have been born," Grex hissed. "The storm comes because of her kind. The elders have decided. Go back to your sector." The viewport slammed shut with finality. Elra stood frozen, not from the cold, but from shock. They were condemning her child to death. In that moment, something hardened inside her, a mother's resolve crystallizing into unbreakable determination. She turned away, scanning desperately for alternatives. There was a human mining outpost about 5 miles north. Their kind rarely interacted with Elra's people, keeping to themselves and their extraction work. But they had technology, structures built to withstand harsh conditions. It was her only hope. Elra had taken only 3 steps when the strongest gust yet knocked her off her feet. She twisted her body midair to avoid crushing Snowdrop, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her shoulder. The wind tore at her cloak, and for one terrifying moment, she felt the carrying sling loosen. "No!" she screamed, clutching desperately, but her fingers, numbed by cold, failed her. Another violent gust ripped Snowdrop from her grasp. Elra lunged forward, but the baby, still wrapped in thermal blankets, was swept away like a leaf in a hurricane. Snowdrop! The name tore from Laura's throat in a primal scream that was instantly swallowed by the roaring storm. She scrambled to her feet, staggering in the direction her child had disappeared. But the blinding snow made visibility impossible. Panic surged through her veins like poison. This couldn't be happening. Not her child. Not her precious Snowdrop. Laura forced herself forward, screaming her baby's name until her voice grew hoarse. The storm intensified, and soon she could barely see her hand in front of her face. Snow was accumulating rapidly, already knee-deep in places. If Snowdrop had landed in a drift, the thought sent a new wave of desperation through her. Laura dropped to her knees, digging frantically through the snow with her bare hands. Her fingertips bled as they cracked in the cold, leaving droplets of purple-blue blood that froze almost instantly. "Please," she sobbed to whoever might be listening, the ancestors, the gods, the universe itself. "Please don't take my baby." But the universe answered only with more snow, more wind, more bitter cold seeping into her bones. As darkness fell completely, Laura's strength began to fail. She had been searching for hours, moving in what she hoped was a widening spiral. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Her lungs felt like they were filling with ice. Still, she pushed on, knowing that to stop meant accepting that Snowdrop was gone forever. She wouldn't accept that. Another blast of wind knocked her down again. This time, getting up took all her remaining strength. Her vision blurred as hypothermia set in. In her delirium, she began to see things. Her mother's face in the swirling snow, the village as it had been when she was a child, before fear and suspicion had poisoned their hearts. Snowdrop grown tall and strong, running through summer fields. "My baby," she whispered as she collapsed again. "My beautiful, perfect baby." This time, she couldn't get up. As consciousness began to slip away, Ellora's last thought was a prayer that if she could not save her child, perhaps someone or something else would. Then darkness took her. 5 miles north of the indigenous settlement, Daniel Adams cursed as his survey vehicle's engine sputtered and died. The magnetic storm was interfering with the electrical systems, something the company engineers had insisted couldn't happen with their breakthrough shielding technology. "So much for breakthroughs," he muttered, pulling his Arctic gear from the emergency compartment. Daniel had been with Terraform Extraction for 3 years as a field engineer, responsible for maintaining the automated drilling equipment that harvested the planet's valuable mineral resources. He'd seen his share of storms on this unforgiving world, but nothing like this one. The meteorological team had been tracking it for days, predicting it would pass well south of the outpost. Clearly, they'd been wrong. He checked the dashboard readings one last time before they went dark. The temperature outside had dropped to -70 degrees. Not ideal conditions for a walk, but he didn't have much choice. The vehicle's heating system would fail within an hour without power, and the outpost was only 2 miles away. Better to move while he still had his full strength. As he secured his thermal hood and activated his heated gloves, Daniel noticed something odd on the sensor panel. Just before losing power, it had registered an unusual electromagnetic signature about half a mile east. Not the random fluctuations typical of the storm, but a consistent pattern. Daniel hesitated. Company protocol was clear. During extreme weather events, personnel were to return to base immediately. But something about that reading nagged at him. It was almost like a distress signal, weak but distinctly artificial. Probably just equipment interference, he told himself. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. With a sigh that fogged the inside of his mask, Daniel made his decision. He'd check the anomaly first, then head to the outpost. If it was nothing, he'd only have added 20 minutes to his journey. If it was something important, well, that's what hazard pay was for. He stepped out into the storm and was immediately assaulted by its fury. The wind threatened to lift him off his feet, and the cold bit through his protective layers like they were made of paper instead of advanced thermal materials. Hunching his shoulders, Daniel activated the compass on his wrist display and began trudging eastward, each step a battle against the elements. 20 minutes later, he was questioning his decision. The sensor reading had led him into a landscape of ice-covered rock formations that loomed like ghostly sentinels in the gloom. His wrist display showed he was approaching the source of the signal, but he could see nothing but snow and more snow. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he thought he'd imagined it at first. He stopped, holding his breath to listen. There it was again, a cry, high-pitched and unmistakably alive. Daniel swept his helmet light in a wide arc, trying to locate the source. Nothing but swirling white. The cry came again, weaker this time. Daniel followed the sound to a small depression between two rock formations, where the wind had created a deep snowdrift. Something was buried there. He dropped to his knees and began digging frantically, scooping away armfuls of snow. His fingers struck something soft, carefully. He brushed away more snow to reveal a bundle of thermal fabric. When he pulled it free and turned it over, Daniel found himself staring into the most extraordinary eyes he had ever seen, like tiny galaxies swirling with pinpoints of light. They belonged to an infant, clearly not human, with translucent skin through which he could see a delicate network of luminescent veins. The baby was alive but barely. Its lips had turned a dangerous shade of blue, and its breathing was shallow. "Hey there, little one," Daniel said softly, tucking the bundle inside his jacket against his chest. "Let's get you warmed up." The infant made a weak noise that might have been a whimper or a sigh. Daniel scanned the area, looking for any sign of whoever had lost the child, but saw only unbroken snow in all directions. "Your folks must be out of their minds with worry," he murmured. "But we can't stay here looking for them. We need to get you somewhere warm." Daniel checked his wrist display again. The outpost was too far. The baby might not survive the journey, but his scans showed a cave formation nearby that would at least provide shelter from the wind. That would have to do for now. He found the cave easily enough, a narrow opening in the rock face that widened into a space just large enough for him to sit upright. It wasn't warm, but it was out of the wind, and that alone made it feel like a luxury hotel compared to the hellscape outside. Daniel activated the emergency heating pack from his survival kit, watching as the chemical reaction caused it to glow red with blessed heat. He placed it carefully near, but not too near, the infant, who was now making small, mewling sounds that tugged at something deep in his chest. "That's it," he encouraged, gently rubbing the baby's tiny limbs to restore circulation. "Fight. You're going to be okay." As warmth slowly returned to the small body, Daniel examined the thermal wrappings more closely. They were finely crafted, with intricate patterns woven into the fabric, not the work of someone careless or negligent. Whoever had lost this child had clearly valued them. But how had a baby ended up alone in the middle of a deadly storm? Had its parents been caught in the open? Were they searching even now? Or... Daniel pushed away the darker possibilities. He needed to focus on keeping this child alive. Questions could wait. He pulled out his emergency rations, nutrient-dense bars designed for human consumption, and hesitated. He had no idea what the infant species could safely consume. The last thing he wanted to do was make things worse by causing an allergic reaction. The baby solved his dilemma by turning its face toward his chest and making sucking motions with its small mouth. "Hungry, huh? I'm afraid I don't have what you're looking for," Daniel said with a small smile. "But maybe." He dug deeper into his pack and found his water supply. Using his glove, he dampened a clean piece of fabric and held it to the baby's lips. The infant sucked eagerly at the moisture. "That'll have to do for now," Daniel said. "Just hold on until we can get you proper help." As if understanding his words, the baby reached up with a tiny six-fingered hand and grasped his thumb with surprising strength. Those extraordinary eyes, fixed on his face with an intelligence that seemed impossible for one so young. Something shifted in Daniel's chest, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. In that moment, he made a silent promise. He would get this child to safety, no matter what it took. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their small shelter, a fragile connection had formed between two beings from different worlds. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, Daniel heard another sound carried on the wind, a voice calling out in desperation. He strained to listen, and there it was again, a word repeated over and over in a fading voice. Snow, drop. Ulra couldn't feel her limbs anymore. The cold had taken them, along with most of her conscious thought. All that remained was a single imperative that kept her moving through the blizzard on pure instinct. Find Snowdrop. She no longer walked, but crawled, her body tunneling through snowdrifts, her voice reduced to a raspy whisper as she called her baby's name. The rational part of her mind, what little remained, knew this was futile. No infant could survive these conditions for hours. But the mother in her refused to accept what logic dictated. When she collapsed for what must have been the 20th time, Laura didn't immediately try to rise again. Her body had reached its absolute limit. Dark spots danced before her eyes as her systems began to shut down. "Forgive me, little one," she whispered. "I failed you." As consciousness slipped away, she thought she heard footsteps crunching through snow, coming closer. Hallucinations, she decided, her mind offering comfort in her final moments. Then, strong arms were lifting her, and a voice, not of her people, but undeniably real, spoke words she couldn't understand. Warmth enveloped her as she was wrapped in something that blocked the wind. Through half-closed eyes, she glimpsed a face unlike her own, flat, with a strange protrusion in the center, covered in some kind of transparent shield. A human. Fear shot through her, providing one last surge of energy. Humans were dangerous. Everyone knew this. They came to planets, stripped them of resources, and left. They viewed other species as curiosities at best, obstacles at worst. Elra struggled weakly against the human's grip. "Snowdrop," she managed to say, her native word coming out distorted through frozen lips. The human paused, then spoke again. This time, Elra caught a word she recognized from the trading language sometimes used between their peoples. "Baby," the human said, making a cradling gesture with one arm. Hope blazed through Lura like fire. "Yes, my baby!" The human nodded and pointed toward a rock formation. Then, still carrying Lura, they began moving in that direction. Each step was agony for Lura. Not physical pain. She was too numb for that. But the torture of not knowing what she would find. Had the human discovered Snowdrop's body? Was this a mercy mission to let a mother say goodbye to her child? They reached a narrow opening in the rocks, and the human ducked inside, carefully maneuvering to avoid bumping Lura against the stone walls. The sudden absence of wind was shocking. Laura's ears rang in the relative quiet. Then she heard it, a soft, familiar cooing sound. Her heart seemed to stop. The human gently set her down beside a glowing heat source and moved to the other side of the small cave. When they returned, they were carrying a small bundle. "Snowdrop," Laura's voice broke on the name. The human unwrapped the bundle just enough to reveal a tiny face, eyes like starfields blinking in the dim light. Alive. Her baby was alive. A sound escaped Laura, half sob, half laugh, as she reached for her child with trembling hands. The human carefully transferred Snowdrop to her arms, and Laura clutched her to her chest, feeling the miracle of her daughter's heartbeat against her own. "You found her," Laura said, looking up at the human with tears freezing on her cheeks. "You saved her." The human removed their face shield, revealing features that Laura would normally have found alien and unsettling. Small eyes, peculiar coloring, hair growing in strange places. But in this moment, it was the most beautiful face she had ever seen. "Daniel," the human said, pointing to himself. His voice was deeper than those of her people, but not unpleasant. "Wulra," she responded, touching her own chest. Then, holding her baby a little higher, "Snowdrop." Daniel smiled, an expression that, surprisingly, translated perfectly across species, and nodded. He moved to the heat source and adjusted something, causing it to glow brighter. The increased warmth washed over Lura like a blessing. As feeling painfully returned to her extremities, Ulra examined Snowdrop carefully. Her baby appeared unharmed, tired and hungry, but miraculously whole. How was this possible? How had this human found her when Ulra herself, with all her determination, had failed? She looked at Daniel with new eyes. Her people spoke of humans as destroyers, as soulless beings who cared only for what they could take. Yet this human had risked his life to save not one, but two members of a species not his own. Everything she thought she knew was suddenly in question. Daniel was speaking again, using simple words from the trading language mixed with gestures. Ulra understood that he wanted them to rest here until the storm lessened, then travel to the human outpost where they could receive proper medical care. The old Elra would have been terrified at the prospect of entering a human facility. Now, she found herself nodding in agreement. This human had earned her trust in the most profound way possible. He had restored her child to her when all hope was lost. As Daniel settled on the other side of the heat source, Ulra gently rocked Snowdrop, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. In the soft glow, she studied her rescuer. He was removing his outer gear, revealing more of the strange human form beneath. His hands had only 5 fingers. How did they manage with so few? His skin was darker than hers and opaque, hiding whatever flowed beneath. Yet, despite these differences, she recognized the kindness in his eyes, the careful way he moved to avoid disturbing the baby, the gentle tone of his voice. These things needed no translation. For the first time since Snowdrop's birth, Ulra felt something she had thought lost forever. Hope, not just for survival, but for a future where her child might be valued for who she was, not feared for how she was different. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but its power over Lura was broken. She had faced the worst it could offer and survived, thanks to the compassion of a being she had been taught to fear. As exhaustion overcame her, Elara's last conscious thought was a silent promise to her daughter. The world might be cold and cruel, but there was warmth to be found in the most unexpected places. And she would make sure Snowdrop grew up knowing that kindness could transcend any boundary, even those between different worlds. Daniel watched as Lura finally succumbed to sleep, her child nestled securely against her chest. The maternal love evident in every protective curve of her body was profoundly moving. It transcended species, reminding him that some things were universal. He checked his wrist display. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was intensifying. They would be here for hours yet. His thoughts drifted to the outpost and what would happen when he arrived with 2 indigenous aliens in tow. Company policy discouraged unnecessary interaction with the native population. Management claimed this was to respect cultural autonomy. But everyone knew the real reason. Fewer relationships meant fewer complications when it came time to strip an area of its resources and move on. Daniel had never questioned these policies before. He did his job, maintained the equipment, and collected his substantial paycheck without giving much thought to the larger implications of Terraform's presence on this planet. Now, looking at the sleeping mother and child, he felt a growing discomfort with his role here. He had lost his own family years ago, parents to illness, a sister to a transport accident. Since then, he had buried himself in work, moving from planet to planet, never staying long enough to form attachments. It was easier that way, safer. But something about finding that baby in the snow had awakened feelings he thought long dead. The fierce protectiveness that had surged through him when those star-filled eyes had met his own had been startling in its intensity. A soft whimper drew his attention back to the present. The infant, Snowdrop, Elora had called her, was stirring, making small sounds of distress. Ulra remained deeply asleep, her body exhausted beyond its limits. Cautiously, Daniel moved closer. The baby's unusual eyes opened, fixing on him with that same unnerving intelligence he had noticed earlier. Her tiny face scrunched up, preparing to cry. "Hey now," Daniel whispered. "Let's let your mom rest a bit longer." To his surprise, Snowdrop quieted at the sound of his voice. Her six-fingered hand reached out, grasping at the air between them. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel extended his index finger. The baby grasped it immediately, her grip surprisingly strong. A strange sensation passed through the point of contact, like a gentle electric current, but pleasant rather than painful. "What are you doing, little one?" Daniel murmured, fascinated. Snowdrop made a soft cooing sound that somehow conveyed contentment. The luminescent veins visible beneath her translucent skin pulsed with a gentle rhythm. Daniel found himself smiling. "You're something special, aren't you? No wonder your mom fought so hard to find you." The baby responded with a sound almost like a purr. Daniel carefully settled himself beside them, making sure the heating pack was positioned to warm all three of them. Snowdrop maintained her grip on his finger, and he found he didn't want to break that connection. As the hours passed, Daniel alternated between light doses and alert watchfulness. Whenever he checked the storm through the cave entrance, it seemed unchanged, a howling white void that made their small shelter feel like the only safe place in the universe. During one of his waking periods, he noticed Lura beginning to stir. Her breathing changed, and her eyes, larger than human eyes and a deep violet color, fluttered open. For a moment, she seemed disoriented. Then her gaze fell on Snowdrop, still clutching Daniel's finger, and awareness returned. "She likes you," Elora said in the trading language, her voice hoarse but stronger than before. Daniel nodded. "Special child." Ulra's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. "Yes, but my people, they fear what is different. They say she brings the storm." Her face hardened. "They left us outside to die." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, filled Daniel with a surge of anger on their behalf. "Your own people did that." Elora nodded, gently stroking Snowdrop's downy head. "They believe she is cursed because of how she looks, because she is different." Daniel thought about how easily humans dismissed other species as primitive or superstitious. Yet, how often human history had been marked by the same fear of difference. "People fear what they don't understand," he said. "Human or not human." This earned him a surprised look from Lara, as if she hadn't expected such insight from a human. "When storm ends," Daniel continued, "we go to outpost. Doctor's there. Help you both." Uncertainty flickered across Lura's features. "Your people, will they welcome us?" It was a fair question, and one Daniel couldn't answer with complete confidence. The medical staff would treat them. Company policy required assistance to any sentient being in life-threatening distress. But beyond that, there were no protocols for hosting indigenous persons long-term. "I will make sure they do," he said finally, with more conviction than he felt. Something had changed in him during these hours in the cave. He had made a silent promise to this child, and he intended to keep it. Elora seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. Then, with careful movements that betrayed her lingering weakness, She reached for something tucked into her tattered cloak. "For you," she said, holding out what appeared to be a bracelet made of intricately woven fibers, embedded with small crystalline structures. Daniel hesitated. "I can't take—" "Family token," Elora interrupted. "Given to those who protect our bloodline. You saved my child when my own would not." Her eyes, so alien yet so expressive, held his. "You are family now." The simple declaration struck Daniel with unexpected force. Family. A word he had excised from his vocabulary years ago, after burying the last person who shared his blood. With slightly trembling fingers, he accepted the bracelet. As soon as it touched his skin, the crystals began to glow with a soft light that matched the luminescence in Snowdrop's veins. "It recognizes you," Laura said, a note of wonder in her voice. "This is rare." Before Daniel could respond, a change in the sound of the wind caught his attention. The howling fury that had been their constant companion for hours had begun to diminish. He moved to the cave entrance and looked out. The storm was breaking. Through gaps in the swirling snow, he could see stars appearing in the night sky. "Storm ending," he reported, returning to where Laura sat with Snowdrop. "Soon we can travel." Elora nodded, her face set in determined lines. "Then we go to your outpost. Together." The way she said "together" made it clear this was more than a simple statement of fact. It was a declaration of trust, perhaps the first such declaration between their species on this planet. Daniel felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders. It should have been a burden, but instead, it felt like a purpose, something he had been lacking for far too long. "Together," he agreed, the bracelet warm against his wrist. Outside, the wind continued to fade, revealing a world transformed by the storm. As they prepared to venture into it, Daniel knew that he, too, had been transformed, not by the elements, but by an encounter that had bridged the vast divide between worlds. The journey to the outpost took twice as long as it should have. Laura, though determined, was still weak from her ordeal, and they had to stop frequently for her to rest. Daniel carried Snowdrop for most of the way, the infant seemingly content in his arms. The storm had left behind a landscape of sculpted snow dunes and ice formations that glittered under the light of the planet's 3 moons. As they approached the halfway point, they came upon a sight that made Laura stop in her tracks. The indigenous settlement, its dome-shaped structures barely visible under the snow. "My village," she said quietly. Daniel glanced at her, trying to read her expression. "Do you want to go there instead?" Ulra's face hardened. "They cast us out. They are not my people anymore." As if sensing the tension, Snowdrop began to fuss. Ulra reached for her, and Daniel carefully transferred the baby to her mother's arms. The effect was immediate. Snowdrop quieted, her star-filled eyes gazing up at Ulra with complete trust. They were about to continue their journey when movement caught their attention. A small figure was trudging through the snow toward them from the direction of the village. As it drew closer, Daniel could see it was a child of Elra's species, perhaps the equivalent of a 10-year-old human, with the same violet eyes as Elra, but none of Snowdrop's unusual features. Elra stiffened, instinctively holding Snowdrop tighter. The child stopped a few paces away, regarding them with what seemed like awe rather than fear. "Laura," the small voice called. "The elders said you were taken by the storm." "The elders were wrong about many things," Ulra replied, her tone carefully neutral. The child's gaze shifted to Snowdrop, then to Daniel, widening with curiosity. "You found help from the Sky People?" Daniel realized this must be how the indigenous population referred to the human settlers, people who had arrived from the sky in their massive ships. "This human saved my daughter's life," Elora said, "and mine." The child took a tentative step closer. May I see the baby? I never believed what they said about her. I wanted to visit you, but my parents forbade it." Elora hesitated, years of rejection warring with the innocent request. Daniel watched her internal struggle, knowing this moment might define her path forward. Finally, she knelt in the snow, adjusting her hold on Snowdrop so the child could see her. "Her name is Snowdrop," Laura said softly. "And she is not cursed. She is simply different." The child approached slowly, eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "She's beautiful," the child whispered, reaching out one small hand. "Her skin holds the stars." Snowdrop, as if understanding she was the center of attention, made a happy gurgling sound and reached toward the child with one six-fingered hand. The moment their fingers touched, Snowdrop's luminescent veins pulsed brightly. The child gasped, but didn't pull away, a smile spreading across her face. "She likes you, Nima," Laura said, using the child's name for the first time. "The others were wrong," Nima said with the simple conviction of youth. "Will you come back to the village now? I can tell them they were wrong." Elra shook her head gently. "Not now. Perhaps someday. For now, we go with Daniel to the human outpost where Snowdrop can be properly cared for." Disappointment crossed Nima's face, but she nodded in understanding. "When you return, you can stay with my family. I will tell them what happened. I will make them understand." The offer, made with such innocence and courage, brought tears to Lara's eyes. "Thank you, Nima. Remember what you've seen today. Different does not mean dangerous." As they parted ways, Daniel noticed a subtle change in Lura's demeanor, a softening around her eyes, a straightening of her shoulders. That small moment of acceptance, especially from a child of her own people, seemed to have healed something within her. They continued their journey in companionable silence. Daniel found himself hyper-aware of each small sound Snowdrop made, each shift in Laura's energy. These two had become important to him, with a speed and intensity that should have been alarming. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When the lights of the outpost finally appeared on the horizon, Daniel felt both relief and apprehension. How would he explain their presence? What would happen to them after their immediate medical needs were addressed? "That is your home?" Ulrika asked, gazing at the collection of prefabricated structures surrounded by a force field that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "Not home," Daniel corrected. "Temporary base. My real home is very far away." He realized as he said it that he hadn't thought of Earth as home for years. Home had become an abstract concept, not a specific place. Ilra seemed to understand the weight behind his words. Sometimes, home is not where you were born, but where you are meant to be. The simple wisdom of her statement stayed with Daniel as they approached the outpost's main gate. He tapped his access code into the security panel, grateful that at least this part of the process would be straightforward. The gate slid open, and they stepped through into the artificial atmosphere of the compound. The sudden warmth was almost shocking after hours in the bitter cold. Within moments, they were spotted by a security guard whose expression of bored vigilance quickly transformed into stunned surprise. "Adams? Is that you? What the—" The guard's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm as he registered Lura and Snowdrop. "Stand down, Phillips," Daniel said firmly. "This woman and her child need medical attention immediately. Call Dr. Eliza to the infirmary." The guard hesitated, protocol warring with the direct order from a senior engineer. "Now, Phillips," Daniel added with an authority he rarely exercised. Something in his tone broke through the guard's uncertainty. He nodded sharply and spoke into his comm unit, requesting medical assistance while keeping a wary eye on the aliens. As they were escorted through the compound, Daniel was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Human-indigenous interactions were strictly regulated, usually limited to formalized resource-sharing agreements negotiated through official channels. The sight of a human engineer walking alongside an indigenous woman carrying an infant was unprecedented. The outpost's medical officer, Dr. Eliza Chen, was waiting for them at the infirmary. To her credit, she showed only a moment's surprise before her professional demeanor took over. "Bring them in," she said, gesturing toward the examination room. "What happened?" As Daniel explained the situation in terse, factual sentences, Dr. Chen began scanning Laura and Snowdrop with medical instruments. Her movements efficient but gentle. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, minor frostbite on the extremities, she reported after examining Laura. Moving to Snowdrop, her expression softened. "The infant is surprisingly stable, though also dehydrated. They both need fluids and warmth, but I see no permanent damage." Relief washed through Daniel. "Can you help them?" Dr. Chen gave him a look that was part exasperation, part curiosity. "Of course I can help them. Adams, the question is why you brought them here instead of to their own settlement." Before Daniel could respond, Elra spoke up, her trading language halting but determined. "My people rejected us, said my child cursed, left us to die in storm." The doctor's expression shifted, compassion replacing professional detachment. "I see. Well, you're safe now. Let's get you both stabilized." Over the next hour, Dr. Chen worked methodically to treat her unusual patients. She administered IV fluids modified to match Elra's physiology, applied regenerative gel to her frostbitten fingers, and prepared a nutrient solution that Snowdrop could safely consume. Throughout the process, Daniel remained at their side, translating when necessary and providing reassurance through his presence. The bracelet Laura had given him remained on his wrist, its crystals glowing softly whenever Snowdrop was near. Once the immediate medical concerns were addressed, the more complicated questions began. Base Commander Marcus Harris arrived at the infirmary, his face a mask of controlled displeasure. "Engineer Adams, a word. It wasn't a request." In the hallway outside the examination room, Harris didn't bother with pleasantries. "You've created quite a situation here. Adams, company policy is clear about indigenous contact." "They would have died, sir," Daniel said simply. "And that would have been unfortunate, but not our concern." Harris ran a hand through his gray hair, a gesture of frustration. "The indigenous population's welfare is their own responsibility. We're here to extract resources, not to intervene in their society." Daniel felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. "With respect, sir, I didn't rescue indigenous population members. I rescued a mother and her baby who were abandoned by their own people and would have frozen to death without help." Harris studied him for a long moment. "You've never struck me as the bleeding heart type, Adams. Neither have you, sir. But I'm guessing you wouldn't leave an infant to die in a blizzard, regardless of species." It was a calculated gamble. Harris was known for his strict adherence to company protocols. But he was not cruel. Daniel had seen him intervene when younger engineers were pushing equipment beyond safe limits, citing concern for their well-being over production quotas. Harris sighed. "What exactly are you proposing? We can't keep them here permanently." "Just until they're fully recovered," Daniel said, seizing the opening. "A few days, maybe a week. Then we can discuss longer-term options." After what seemed like an eternity, Harris nodded curtly. "1 week. They'll be your responsibility. Any issues, and they're gone immediately. Clear?" "Crystal, sir, thank you." When Daniel returned to the examination room, he found Laura sitting up, looking much stronger after the treatments. Snowdrop was nestled in her arms, contentedly consuming the nutrient solution Dr. Chen had prepared. "Good news," Daniel said, forcing a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "You can stay here while you recover." Ulray's violet eyes searched his face, reading more than his words conveyed. "And after?" Daniel sat beside her, choosing his next words carefully. "We'll figure that out together. But you're safe for now. I promise." The gravity of that promise wasn't lost on either of them. In the span of one storm-filled night, their lives had become inextricably linked. Whatever came next, they would face it not as separate beings from different worlds, but as something new, something that perhaps had no name yet. As if to seal this unspoken understanding, Snowdrop reached out one tiny hand, her star-filled eyes fixed on Daniel's face. When he extended his finger to her, the connection that passed between them felt like a beginning. Outside, the world was still blanketed in the storm's aftermath, vast and unforgiving. But within the outpost's walls, a small space of warmth and possibility had opened up, defying all the barriers that should have kept them apart. Days at the outpost turned into weeks. What had begun as temporary medical care evolved into something neither Daniel nor Elra could have anticipated. Elra proved to be a quick study, absorbing the human's language with remarkable speed. Within a month, she could carry on basic conversations without resorting to the limited trading language. Snowdrop thrived in the controlled environment of the outpost, her unusual features drawing curiosity rather than fear from most of the human staff. For his part, Daniel found himself restructuring his entire routine around his new companions. His quarters, designed for a single occupant, were adjusted to accommodate Elra and Snowdrop. He requested shifts that allowed him to spend more time with them, teaching Lyra about human customs while learning about her culture in return. Commander Harris, after his initial reluctance, had gradually come to accept their presence. The turning point had come during a particularly tense negotiation with the Indigenous Council over a new extraction site. Lara, with her understanding of both cultures, had offered insights that led to a mutually beneficial agreement, something the company had been struggling to achieve for months. "She's an asset," Harris had admitted grudgingly to Daniel afterward. "But this arrangement can't last forever. Terraform Corporate will eventually ask questions." Daniel knew this was true, but he pushed the concern to the back of his mind. For the first time in years, he felt connected to something beyond his work, something that gave his life meaning beyond the next resource deposit or equipment upgrade. On a clear day 3 months after the storm, Daniel took Lyra and Snowdrop outside the compound to witness the planet's rare triple moonrise. They sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, Snowdrop secure in a carrier Daniel had fabricated from outpost materials. "In my culture," Elra said, watching as the first moon crested the horizon, "we believe the moons are ancient guardians who watch over all living things. When all three appear together, it is a time for new beginnings." Daniel glanced at her profile, struck as always by the elegant structure of her features. Different from human, yes, but beautiful in their own right. "Do you miss your village?" he asked, the question he had been avoiding for months. Elra was silent for a long moment. "I miss what it should have been," she finally said. "A place of belonging, of acceptance." She looked down at Snowdrop, who was reaching toward the rising moons with fascination. "But I would not return there now, even if invited. Some bonds, once broken, cannot be repaired." "And what about new bonds?" Daniel asked, suddenly acutely aware of the bracelet still on his wrist, its crystals glowing softly in the gathering dusk. Elra's gaze met his, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the biological differences that should have made such a connection impossible. "New bonds can be stronger than those we are born with," she said softly. "Chosen family rather than given family." The second moon appeared, bathing the landscape in a silvery blue light that made Snowdrop's translucent skin seem to glow from within. The baby made a delighted sound, her star-filled eyes reflecting the celestial display. "She's growing so fast," Daniel observed, gently stroking Snowdrop's downy head with one finger. The infant had nearly doubled in size since he had found her in the snow, and her vocalizations were becoming more complex each day. "Among my people, development is rapid in the first year," Elra explained. "She will be walking soon, and speaking not long after. The thought filled Daniel with a mixture of excitement and melancholy. He wanted to witness every milestone in Snowdrop's development. Yet each day brought them closer to the inevitable moment when corporate headquarters would discover their situation and force a decision. As if reading his thoughts, Elra placed her six-fingered hand over his. "We cannot stay here forever, Daniel. This place, it is not meant for raising a child. Too many machines, too little open sky." "I know," he admitted. "But where would you go? Your village?" "Not there," Elra said firmly. "But this planet is vast. There are places where different peoples have learned to coexist. The trading outpost at the southern continent, perhaps." Daniel had heard of this place, a settlement that had grown organically around a neutral trading zone, populated by various species, including a small human contingent. It was outside Terraform's jurisdiction, operating under independent colonial charters. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he realized. Elra nodded. "I must think of Snowdrop's future. She needs a place where she will be valued for who she is, not feared for how she looks." The third moon rose, completing the trio in the darkening sky. Snowdrop cooed in delight, reaching up as if she could grasp the celestial bodies in her tiny hands. "I want to come with you," Daniel said, the words emerging before he had fully processed the thought. "If you'll have me." Elra turned to him, surprise evident in her violet eyes. "Your life is here, your work, your people." Daniel shook his head. "My work is just work, and these people, they're colleagues, not family." He glanced down at the bracelet, then at Snowdrop. "You said it yourself. Family is chosen, not given. I choose you, both of you." It was a declaration that should have felt reckless, given how little time they had known each other. Yet it felt like the most natural thing he had ever said, as if his life had been leading to this moment of clarity. Elra's expression softened, and she reached up to touch his face, a gesture she had never made before. Her fingertips were cool against his skin, sending a pleasant shiver down his spine. "You would leave everything behind, for us?" "I would," Daniel said, surprised by his own certainty. "What's here for me except more of the same? Extract resources, move to the next site, repeat until retirement. That's not living, it's just existing." Snowdrop chose that moment to reach for Daniel, making the distinctive sound she had begun to associate specifically with him, a sort of chirping trill that never failed to warm his heart. He took her small form from the carrier, cradling her against his chest, as he had done so many times since the night of the storm. "Pa," Snowdrop said clearly, her star-filled eyes fixed on his face. Daniel froze, his breath catching. "Did she just—" "Her first word," Lura confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "She calls you father." Something broke open inside Daniel, a dam he had built years ago when he buried the last of his blood family. Tears filled his eyes as he looked down at the infant in his arms, this miraculous being who had somehow claimed him as her own. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Yes, I'm here." Elra moved closer, creating a circle of warmth in the cool evening air. "Then it is decided," she said. "When the spring thaw comes, we will go south, together." As the three moons shone down on their small family, illuminating three very different beings, connected by something far stronger than biology, Daniel felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many in a world that often feared difference, they would face them together. The storm that had nearly claimed 2 lives had instead created something new and precious, a family forged not in the conventional bonds of blood and species, but in the more enduring bonds of compassion, courage, and choice. Daw. Spring came to the northern continent slowly, then all at once. One day, patches of the planet's purple-tinged vegetation began appearing through the melting snow. The next, Entire fields had erupted in a riot of color as native flowers bloomed with explosive enthusiasm after the long winter. For Daniel, the changing season brought both anticipation and anxiety. He had submitted his resignation to Terraform Extraction, citing personal reasons. Commander Harris, who had come to understand more than he let on, had processed the paperwork without asking questions, adding a generous service bonus that would help establish their new life in the southern settlement. Their departure was set for the next morning. Daniel had spent weeks preparing, securing necessary documentation for all three of them, arranging transport, and researching living conditions in the mixed-species community they would soon call home. On their final evening at the outpost, Daniel took Lura and Snowdrop to a small garden area some of the staff had established inside the compound's force field. It wasn't much. A few native plants, some imported earth species adapted to the local soil, but it was the closest thing to nature within the sterile environment of the mining operation. Snowdrop, now able to take wobbly steps while holding onto Laura's fingers, was fascinated by the plants. At 9 months old, she was developing at an astonishing rate, already speaking several words in both human and indigenous languages. Her star-filled eyes widened with delight as she reached out to touch a delicate purple flower. "Gentle, little one," Elra instructed, guiding her daughter's 6-fingered hand. "Like this." Snowdrop mimicked her mother's careful gesture, then looked up at Daniel for approval. "That's perfect," he said with a smile. "You're learning so quickly." "Bah!" Snowdrop responded happily, releasing her mother's hand to reach for him instead. Her steps were unsteady, but determined as she navigated the short distance between them. Daniel knelt to receive her, his heart swelling as it did every time she called him by that name. He had never imagined himself as a father, especially not to a child from another species. Yet here he was, his entire life reorganized around this small being who had claimed him so completely. Elra watched them with a soft expression. Over the months, the hardness that had initially characterized her features, the protective shell formed by rejection and survival, had gradually melted away. She still carried herself with dignity and strength, but there was a peace about her now that had been absent when they first met. "The transport leaves early," she reminded him. "We should finish packing." Daniel nodded, lifting Snowdrop into his arms. "Almost everything's ready. Just a few personal items left." They walked back to their quarters in comfortable silence, acknowledging the nods and well wishes of those staff members who had come to accept their unusual family. Not everyone at the outpost had been supportive. Some had maintained their distance, uncomfortable with the blurring of boundaries between species, but enough had shown kindness to make their time there bearable. In their small living space, Daniel watched as Elra efficiently packed the few possessions they had accumulated. Most were practical items, clothing adapted for Elra's form, toys fabricated for Snowdrop, medical supplies specific to their physiology. But there were also tokens of their time together. A crystal formation Daniel had found on a survey mission that had made Snowdrop laugh with delight. A drawing Laura had created of the 3 moons rising. The first tool Snowdrop had learned to use, a small spoon modified for her grip. As Laura placed these treasures carefully in their bag, Daniel removed something from his pocket, a small, polished stone carved with intricate patterns. "I have something for you," he said, holding it out to her. "It's a tradition among some human cultures to build a new home around a cornerstone, the first stone that supports everything else. I thought we could take this with us, as the foundation of our new beginning." Elra took the stone, running her fingers over the patterns he had spent hours carving. "These symbols, from both our cultures," Daniel explained. "I asked Dr. Chen to help me find examples from your people's art, and I combined them with human designs." Elra's eyes shimmered with emotion. "It is beautiful, Daniel." She reached into her own garment and withdrew something that glinted in the artificial light. "I also have a gift." She held out what appeared to be a second family bracelet, similar to the one Daniel still wore but sized for a much smaller wrist. "For Snowdrop," she explained, "when she is grown enough to understand its meaning. Until then, we will keep it safe for her." Daniel accepted the bracelet with reverence, understanding the significance of such a gift. Among Lara's people, these tokens were passed down through generations, connecting family members across time. "We will give it to her together," he promised, "when the time is right." Snowdrop, who had been contentedly playing with a soft toy on the floor, looked up at the serious tone of their voices. With a determined expression that always reminded Daniel of Lara, she pulled herself up and toddled over to them. "Ma, Pa, go?" she asked, her limited vocabulary nevertheless conveying her understanding that something important was happening. El Rey knelt beside her daughter. "Yes, little star. Tomorrow we go to our new home." Snowdrop considered this, her extraordinary eyes reflecting the light in constantly shifting patterns. Then she smiled, a gesture she had learned from Daniel, and nodded as if approving their decision. "Home," she repeated, reaching out to touch both their faces with her small hands. "Together." In that moment, looking at this child who embodied the bridge between their worlds, Daniel felt a certainty that transcended all the doubts and practical concerns that had plagued him during their planning. Whatever challenges awaited them in their new life, this was right. This was where he belonged. Later, after Snowdrop had fallen asleep in the small bed they had fashioned for her, Daniel and Lara stood by the window, looking out at the 3 moons that had become a symbol of their unlikely union. "Are you afraid?" Lara asked softly, her shoulder touching his in the companionable way they had developed. Daniel considered the question honestly. "Not of the future with you and Snowdrop," he said. "But I worry about how others will see us. Both our peoples have their prejudices." Lara nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "We will face those together, as we have faced everything since the storm." She took his hand, her 6 fingers intertwining with his 5, in a way that had once seemed awkward, but now felt perfectly natural. The crystals in his bracelet glowed in response to her touch, as they always did. "Do you ever wonder," Daniel asked, "what would have happened if there had been no storm that night? If we had never met?" Elra was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the southern continent lay waiting. "My people have a saying. The universe places us where we need to be, even when it seems cruel in the moment." She turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The storm was not our enemy, Daniel. It was the hand that brought us together." Daniel thought about the chain of events that had led him to that precise spot in the blizzard. The vehicle malfunction, the unusual reading, his decision to investigate rather than head straight for the outpost. So many small choices that could have gone differently, yet had aligned perfectly to create this moment. "When I was a child," he said, "my mother used to tell me that home isn't a place. It's wherever your heart feels most complete." He looked toward the small bed where Snowdrop slept peacefully. "I think I finally understand what she meant." Elra followed his gaze, her expression softening. "Then we are already home, no matter where we go tomorrow." As they stood together in the quiet of their last night at the outpost, the 3 moons illuminated a landscape transformed by spring's arrival. The snow that had nearly claimed 2 lives had melted away, revealing new growth and possibility. In the morning, they would board a transport and travel south to begin their life in a community where difference was accepted rather than feared. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments of doubt, but there would also be joy, discovery, and the daily miracle of watching Snowdrop grow into whatever remarkable being she was destined to become. The storm that had brought them together had long since passed, but its effects would ripple through their lives forever, not as trauma to be overcome, but as the catalyst that had created something precious and unexpected, A family defined not by blood or species, but by choice and love. Outside, the last patches of snow melted under the triple moonlight, making way for new beginnings.